It all started on an unremarkable Tuesday, but isn't that how the most life-altering events usually happen? I remember sitting in the sterile clinic waiting room, scrolling mindlessly on my phone, when Dr. Bennett called my name. His voice, a deep, honeyed baritone, sent a shiver down my spine before I even looked up. When I met his gaze, it was as if the world around me faded. His presence commanded attention. He wasn't just handsome, he was magnetic. His cologne, something woodsy and warm, lingered in the air, intoxicating me. For a moment, I forgot I was married, forgot about Eric waiting for me at home, and found myself completely captivated. I was just a wife, a stay-at-home mom with a life that had fallen into predictable patterns. My husband, Eric, was a good man, steady, reliable, but the spark we once had was now just embers. Dr. Bennett, on the other hand, was fire. Our first encounter was innocent enough. I had a minor health concern, and he handled it with professionalism and care. But as I left his office, my heart raced in a way it hadn't in years. Days later, I found myself thinking about him at odd moments, while cooking dinner, folding laundry, or lying in bed next to Eric. I chalked it up to a silly crush, but deep down I knew it was more. Before I continue, make sure to like and subscribe if you want to hear more stories that pull you into the tangled webs of love, betrayal, and passion. Trust me, this story is just getting started. What began as a harmless thought quickly spiraled into obsession. I made excuses to see Dr. Bennett. First for follow-ups, then for things I didn't even need. Every interaction was charged with unspoken tension. I told myself it was all in my head, but the way his eyes lingered on mine said otherwise. By the end of that first appointment, I was already in trouble. I never thought I would cross the line, but one decision after another brought me closer to it, and by the time I realized what I had done, there was no turning back. I scheduled another appointment with Dr. Bennett just 2 weeks after my last. There was nothing wrong with me, nothing that warranted a doctor's visit anyway. My excuse was a vague complaint about fatigue, but in reality, I just needed to see him. When I walked into his office that day, I could feel the tension hanging in the air. His usual smile seemed warmer, his gaze lingering a second too long. He sat across from me, close enough that I could smell his cologne. "You've been in here a lot lately," he said, his tone teasing but curious. I laughed nervously, brushing it off. "I guess I'm just overly cautious." He smiled again, leaning back in his chair, his broad shoulders stretching the fabric of his coat. "Better safe than sorry, I suppose." It wasn't just the way he looked at me, it was the way he listened, the way he made me feel seen. For years, Eric had barely noticed when I entered a room, let alone asked about how I felt. But here was this man, hanging on to my every word, making me feel like I was the only woman in the world. I started inventing reasons to come back. A mole that looked suspicious, a persistent headache, anything to spend a few moments in his presence. The turning point came late one evening. I had scheduled a last-minute appointment after hours, claiming I couldn't come during the day. He didn't seem to mind. When I arrived, the office was quiet, the staff long gone. It was just the two of us. He greeted me with that same warm smile, but this time, something was different. The air between us felt electric. "I almost didn't recognize you without your scrubs," I joked, trying to lighten the mood. He laughed, the sound deep and genuine. "And I almost didn't recognize you without your excuses." I froze, heat rushing to my cheeks. Before I could respond, he stepped closer, his eyes locking onto mine. "Do you want to tell me what's really going on, or should I guess?" he asked, his voice low and steady. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. The truth hung heavily between us. Before I knew what was happening, he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. His touch was electric, sending shivers down my spine. My breath hitched, and in that moment, the world seemed to stop. "This is wrong," I whispered, even as my body betrayed me, leaning into his touch. "Then why does it feel so right?" he replied, his voice barely audible. The next thing I knew, his lips were on mine. The kiss was hungry, desperate, and all-consuming. It was as though years of pent-up longing had finally been unleashed. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years, as if I had been drowning, and he was the air I so desperately needed. We didn't stop there. That night, we found ourselves in a small hotel just outside of town. It wasn't glamorous, but in that moment it didn't matter. The passion we shared was intoxicating, overwhelming every shred of guilt I should have felt. I told myself it was just one night, but deep down I knew it wouldn't end there. The affair quickly became a routine. I'd make excuses to leave the house, errands that took hours longer than they should have, sudden plans with friends who didn't exist. Each time we were together, the thrill outweighed the guilt. I was addicted to him, his touch, his scent, the way he made me feel alive. But with every stolen moment, I was playing with fire. And deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before I got burned. Before I take you further into this unraveling web of passion and betrayal, don't forget to like and subscribe. Stories like this show the raw, unfiltered truth of human desires and consequences. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. Secrets are heavy things. At first, they thrill you, the rush of having something hidden, something forbidden. But over time, they begin to weigh you down. And the weight of my affair with Dr. Bennett was beginning to crush me. Eric wasn't a fool. He was the kind of man who noticed the small things, even if he didn't always speak up. At first, I dismissed his questions, innocent ones about where I had been or why I seemed distracted. But as the weeks turned into months, his tone shifted from casual curiosity to something darker, suspicion. One evening, as I stood in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner, Eric leaned against the counter, watching me. His gaze was intense, scrutinizing. "You've been out a lot lately," he said. "Errands, appointments, meetings with friends. It's like you're always gone." I froze, my hands trembling slightly. "I've just been busy. You know how it is." "Busy with what?" he pressed, his voice calm but firm. I avoided his eyes, focusing on the cutting board. "You're making it sound like something it's not, Eric. Can't I have my own life?" He didn't respond right away, and when I finally looked up, I saw something in his expression that made my stomach drop. It wasn't anger, it was doubt. The truth was, I had been careless. I'd left small clues, like breadcrumbs leading to my betrayal. A receipt for a hotel I couldn't explain. A whiff of cologne that wasn't his. A text message from Dr. Bennett I had forgotten to delete. Eric wasn't a man who liked confrontation, but even he had his limits, and I was about to find them. One night, I came home late, too late to explain away. Eric was waiting for me in the living room, his face shadowed by the dim light of the lamp. He held my phone in his hand. "What's this?" he asked, his voice quiet but laced with steel. My heart sank as I saw the screen. Dr. Bennett's name glowed back at me, along with the message I had sent just hours earlier. "I can't stop thinking about tonight. When can I see you again?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. What could I say? The truth was staring us both in the face. Eric stood, his posture rigid, his knuckles white as he gripped my phone. "How long has this been going on?" "It's not what it looks like," I blurted, the light tumbling out before I could stop it. "Don't insult me, Sarah," he snapped, his voice rising. "I've seen the receipts, the excuses, the way you've been acting. Do you think I'm stupid?" Tears blurred my vision as I tried to explain, to justify the unjustifiable. It wasn't supposed to happen. I didn't mean for this to. To what? To betray me? To throw away everything we've built for some fling. His voice cracked, the pain evident. "It wasn't just a fling," I whispered, the words escaping before I could stop them. He stared at me, his face a mix of heartbreak and rage. "Get out," he said finally, his voice cold and clipped. "I don't care where you go, but I can't look at you right now." I drove aimlessly that night, the weight of my actions crashing down on me. I thought of Dr. Bennett, the way he made me feel alive, and Eric, the man I had once promised to love and cherish. How had I let it come to this? Secrets have a way of unraveling everything you hold dear. And in that moment, as I sat alone in my car, I realized I was about to lose it all. Before I take you to the final reckoning, don't forget to like and subscribe. The choices we make often come with a cost, and this story is no exception. The house felt foreign when I returned the next morning. Eric's car was gone, and the silence inside was deafening. I walked through the living room, each step echoing with the weight of my choices. It was a place filled with memories, birthdays, anniversaries, lazy Sundays on the couch, but now, it felt like a graveyard for everything we'd built together. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Dr. Bennett. I hesitated before answering, my voice a whisper. "Hello." Sarah, are you okay? His voice was calm, soothing, but it only made the ache in my chest worse. I don't know, I admitted, the words heavy with guilt. Do you need me to come to you? He offered. No, I said quickly, panic rising in my throat. Eric knows. He's seen everything. There was a long pause on the other end. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured. Then it's time to face it, Sarah. You can't keep running from this. He was right, but hearing it didn't make it any easier. Eric came home that evening. The sound of his car pulling into the driveway sent a wave of dread through me. When he walked through the door, his face was unreadable, his eyes cold. Eric, I began, but he held up a hand, silencing me. Don't, he said sharply. I've heard enough lies from you to last a lifetime. He dropped his keys on the counter and looked at me, his expression hard. I spoke to a lawyer today. The words hit me like a physical blow. A lawyer? What did you expect, Sarah? He snapped, his voice rising. That I'd just forgive you? Pretend this never happened? I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to beg for forgiveness, to promise I'd do whatever it took to fix things. But another part of me, the part that had craved Dr. Bennett's touch, knew it was too late. Do you love him? Eric asked suddenly, his voice quiet but full of anguish. The question caught me off guard. Did I love Dr. Bennett? Or was it just the thrill, the escape from the monotony of my life with Eric? I don't know, I admitted, my voice trembling. He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. That's not an answer. I never wanted to hurt you, I said, tears streaming down my face. But you did, he replied, his voice breaking. And now we have to live with that. The next few days passed in a blur. Eric moved into the guest room and we barely spoke. The distance between us was suffocating, but I didn't know how to bridge it. I met Dr. Bennett one last time, desperate for clarity. We sat in his car, parked in a secluded lot. I don't know what to do, I confessed, my hands trembling. Then let me make it easy for you, he said, his voice firm. End it with me, Sarah. Go back to your husband. Try to fix what you can. His words stunned me, but I thought. I care about you, he interrupted, his eyes meeting mine. But I can't be the reason you destroy your life. It was the right thing to do, but it didn't make it any less painful. When I came home that evening, Eric was waiting for me in the living room. His suitcase was by the door. I'm leaving, he said simply. Eric, please, I begged, falling to my knees in front of him. Don't do this. We can fix this. He shook his head, his expression resolute. I can't live like this, Sarah. Every time I look at you, I see him. I see what you did. But I ended it. I cried. I chose you. It's too late, he said softly, his voice full of sorrow. Some things can't be undone. As he walked out the door, I felt my world collapse around me. The man I had promised to love forever was gone, and I had no one to blame but myself. Now, as I sit in the empty house that used to be our home, I can't help but wonder, was it worth it? The thrill, the passion, the fleeting moments of escape, none of it compares to the pain of losing everything. If you've ever faced a moment of temptation, a choice that could change your life forever, remember the story. Like and subscribe to hear more tales of love, loss, and the consequences of our actions. The cracks had turned into a chasm, and now I was left standing on the edge alone.